kind of go from a little bit here, a little bit there today. Let's start off with verse 11. Exodus 3:11 and 12. But Moses protested to God, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" Verse 12, God answered, "I will be with you, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought up the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain." And we'll end there for today. Last week we looked at how God called Moses. Moses was out tending his flock of sheep. And he went deep into the wilderness, we were told in the beginning of chapter 3. And as he was out there, on one particular day, as he is on Mount Sinai, he sees this bush that's on fire, but it's not burning up. And so as he gets closer, he has this encounter with God. And throughout the conversation, God basically tells him, "Hey, I want you to go. I'm sending you back to Egypt, to Pharaoh, and you will lead my people out." That's the end of the conversation from last week. Today, as we continue this story, this conversation, after God has called Moses, and as Moses begins to be hesitant about the task that God has called him to do, I want us to understand this, that when God calls us to do something, that He promises that He will be with us every step of the way. When God calls us to do something, that He is with us. This is the truth that I want us to believe this morning. I think that when we look at our own abilities, when we take inventory of our strengths and our weaknesses, sometimes God asks us to do something. We look at ourselves and we think, "No, God, surely you're mistaken. Maybe you want another John Park, the 200,000 that are out there in this world. Maybe you have mistaken me for someone else." That's what we reason, because we are looking at our own abilities. We're looking at our weaknesses perhaps, and we're saying, that is not something that I can do. I've told you this many times, but me standing in front of people and speaking should comfort you guys. That when we trust God, nothing is impossible. When we look at Moses' response, and we're going to look at, there's about 3 times I think Moses kind of really backtracks. We're going to look at these 3 things today. And when we look at his responses, I believe that we will be able to identify some tendencies that are found in all people who don't understand how God works. So what Moses is experiencing is nothing new. It happens even today. And it has happened throughout history. Those who do not quite understand how God works, those who fail to see God's awesome power, there's certain tendencies that are common for all the people who are in Moses' situation. On one level, I think we can brush it off as saying, "Oh, it's just a lack of faith." But on another level, I think something that's going on perhaps behind the scenes, I think we can explain it by saying this, that we succumb to the lies of the enemy. That there's a voice that whispers in our ears, "You can't do this. This task is too great for you. Who do you think you are?" So we succumb to the lies of the enemy. And when we look at Moses' reservations and look at his fears, I think you will notice Satan's tactics, his diversions, because he wants to prevent Moses from following God in obedience. That's his objective. And many times that's the same objective that he has with us. He wants to prevent us from following God in obedience, stepping out in faith. Because many times Satan wants to keep us exactly where we are. But yet God wants us to take us beyond that. into greater things that He has in store for us. So we need to know what are some things that we need to not pay attention to. What are some things that we must ignore? And this morning I want to share 3 things based upon Moses' response of things that we ought to ignore or pay no attention to. First thing that we should not pay attention to is the belief that I am not good enough. Where do I get this? It comes in verse 11. Moses protested to God. He says in verse 11, "Who am I to appear before Pharaoh? Who am I to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt?" When God calls us to a certain task, when we protest or when we refuse or when we're hesitant, you know the underlying theme behind, the underlying reason why we feel that way is because somehow we have been led to feel that we are not good enough. That we're not good enough for the task that God has called us. And Moses is feeling the same way here. He's saying, who am I to stand before Pharaoh? It's just like any of us saying, who am I to stand before President of the United States of America? Who am I to go before him? I don't have the right to go before him and tell him, hey, you need to do this and this and this. Who am I to be the leader of the people of Israel? They don't know me. I'm not qualified. Look at Moses' response. Who am I? You see, in that response, we see the belief that somehow he is not qualified or is not good enough. Moses looked at the task that God is calling him. I want you to go lead my people out of Egypt. That was what God had wanted him. And then he looked at himself, his credentials, his resume, his life experience, whatever else you want. He looked at himself in the mirror and he said, I don't have what it takes. I don't have the credentials. He says, I'm not a public speaker. I don't have leadership qualities. I'm just a shepherd right now. This is all I do. This is all I've been doing. How can I, a lowly shepherd, how can I stand before Pharaoh? How can I go and tell the Israelites, follow me, and I will lead you out of Egypt? But let's trace back to early days of Moses' life. Where did he come from? He came from Egypt. But where did he grow up? Look at Acts chapter 7. In Acts chapter 7, verse 21 through 22, about halfway through verse 21, it says this: Pharaoh's daughter adopted him and raised him as her own son. Okay? Remember Moses' story? His parents kept him hidden. At 3 months, they put him in a basket. He goes into the water. Pharaoh's daughter sees him. She has compassion, takes him out. And Miriam, his sister, who was watching, says, shall I get a Hebrew lady to come and nurse the baby? She said, great idea. She pays her. Moses' mom is taking care of him until an age, about 7 or 8, I believe it is. He is brought to Pharaoh's daughter, who adopts him as her own son. But more importantly, look at verse 22. Moses was taught all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and he was powerful in both speech and action. Moses was provided the finest education in Egypt as the daughter of Pharaoh, or as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. As he was the grandson of the president or the king, that level, nothing was spared. He was provided the finest of education all throughout his early days of life. And at this time, there is no other nation that compared to Egypt in terms of its wealth, in terms of its education. It was the best of the best. and he had complete and total access to that. Pharaoh's daughter, one of the reasons scholars believe that she has such a liking to and compassion to Moses was because she herself did not have children, could not have children. So when she adopted him, when she brought him into her house, it was under every indication that he would become future leader. So she groomed him with the finest of education, and she prepared him to become a leader of Egypt. That was how he was raised. Moses' upbringing, everything that his mom or adopted mom, Pharaoh's daughter, who's not named in the scripture, everything that she did was to set him up to succeed. And fast forward many years, he is standing before God and he's saying, I am not qualified to go. He forgot where he came from. Contrary to what Moses felt, he was qualified. But he started believing in the lies of the enemy that says, Moses, you're just a shepherd. Who do you think you are? You can't go before Pharaoh. What are you going to go? With your fumbling language? You're going to go? They're going to laugh at you. The second thing that we should not pay attention to is this idea of fear of man. Look at chapter 4, verse 1. So Moses protests again. Chapter 4, verse 1. What if they don't believe me or listen to me? What if they say, the Lord never appeared to you? What is Moses saying in chapter 4, verse 1? He fears rejection. Moses was afraid that the people wouldn't believe him or listen to him. He was afraid that the people would question his story, that they would think he was crazy, that he made it all up. What did he make up? The fact that he saw God through a burning bush. Okay? Think about Moses has to tell the people how God met him, how God called him, how God told him to come back to Egypt, and then that they should follow him. He had to convince all of them. So when he's thinking about this, he's saying, what if the people don't believe me? Moses feared man. You see, the fear of man cripples us. It paralyzes and prevents us from moving forward. As God is calling him, and as he looks ahead to the moment of where he has to stand before the people and say, hey guys, come follow me. God told me to come back. I'm going to lead you guys to freedom. Okay, these are generations of people who have grown up in slavery. They know no other life. And here comes this guy who they don't know, who says, I am going to lead you guys out. We will be free. They would think he is actually crazy. And as Moses is thinking about that, and as he's thinking, I'm going to get rejected by the people, I am afraid. God, what if they don't believe me? It's the fear of man. It's this fear, it really cripples us from moving forward, stepping out. Fear of man, it messes with our minds. It causes us to believe the lies of the enemy. It causes us to be timid, prevents us from responding in faith. You know, I read something that kind of made me laugh. I think it's because there's a certain ounce of truth to this statement. And depending on where you are in your life, you might find this to be either funny or not funny. Let me read it to you. In your 20s and 30s, you worry about what other people think of you. In your 40s and 50s, you stop worrying what other people think about you. And finally, in your 60s and 70s, you realize that they were never thinking about you in the first place. We worry so much about what other people think. if I do this, what will people think? If I say this, what will people think? We're so cautious. We're so timid, so reserved. We fear man. We fear rejection. We don't do certain things because we fear rejection. We fear failure. You think, oh, I would like to try this, but what if it doesn't work out? You see, that fear it cripples us. And on top of that, when we bring God into this, when God is opening the door and we don't step out in faith because we fear man, we're crippled. We go through the same line of questions and reasoning as Moses did. What if they don't believe me? What if they don't listen to me? What if they reject me? What if they laugh at me? Oh, that's a tough one. Oh, I don't want to get laughed at. I don't want to look foolish. What if? There's a lot of that in our lives. Don't let the fear of man cripple you from responding in faith to God's calling upon your life. The third thing that we should not pay attention to is this idea that somehow God's ability or power is limited. One of Moses' excuse is that he isn't very good with words. I want to look at chapter 4, verse 10. Moses says that, I'm not very good with words. He's not elegant in his speech, that he gets tongue-tied. This is what Moses is saying. Look at verse 10. But Moses pleaded with the Lord, "O Lord, I am not very good with words. I have never been and I am not now, even though you have spoken to me. I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled." When you read through verse 10 just quickly like that, you just focus on the first part. I'm not very good with words. But there's something here that's going on. There's something that Moses is saying. In this statement in verse 10, Moses is doubting God's power and ability. Where we see that? Look at further a little bit. The second sentence, I never have been, and this is the key, and I'm not now, even though you have spoken to me. Did you catch that? This is the NLT. If you read the NIV, similar things. What Moses is saying here is, Lord, I'm not doubting you, but I am doubting you. I'm not saying that you can, but you haven't. I've never been good with works. And throughout even this incredible encounter with you, I'm still not very good with words. So nothing has changed. You see, in that statement, he doubts the power of God. He doubts the ability of God to transform us. It's very subtle. I don't know how many times I've read through verse 10, and it never quite dawned on me until recently. What Moses is saying here. Moses is saying, God, you can't help me with this. Yeah, I know you say you're going to be with me, but you know what? The fact of the matter is, I still am terrible with words. I still get tongue-tied. Couple what's going on with him, plus the fear of rejection and all of this stuff, you can see why he's thinking, at least change that aspect, then I will go out and I will step out in faith. He doesn't say that, but in a sense, that's what he's saying. Okay, I will do it if you give me words to speak. Let me be eloquent like, I don't know, my brother Aaron, who actually God sends with him. We doubt God's ability or power to transform us. Although Moses could think of many reasons that he isn't the right man for the job, God calls him. We doubt that God can shore up. Okay, we doubt that God can transform us. We doubt that God can shore up our shortcomings in order that we can be effective for His service. We must pay no attention to these lies. Pay no attention to the lies that says you're not good enough. That somehow the fear of man should prevent us from following after God, or the fact that we feel that God cannot transform us. God reassures Moses. Even though Moses feels like he's not the right person, God reassures him that you are the right person, and you are the one that I am calling to lead my people out. So 3 times that we see Moses kind of trying to get out of the situation. After each one of these cases, or each one of these incidences, God actually brings reassurance to Moses. And let's look at those 3 times that God reassures him. The first reassurance is that God will go with Moses. This is found in chapter 3, verse 12. It's the first section that we looked at. Chapter 3, verse 12. At the beginning of verse 12, God says this, I will be with you. God is telling Moses that not to worry about whether or not he is qualified to stand before Pharaoh, whether or not he feels that he is the right person to lead the Israelites out. That doesn't matter, because God says, I have called you and I will be with you. What more assurance can we expect? What more assurance do we need than this? That God says, I am with you. I will be with you every single step of the way. When God calls us, He promises that He will go with us. Knowing this should produce an affirmative, yes, Lord, or I will go. There shouldn't be no hesitations. If God is with us, what more do we need? That we are able to step out in faith knowing that we're not alone. The second assurance that God gives is miraculous signs. That Moses will be performing these miraculous signs. Moses' fear was that the people wouldn't believe him. So God tells him to show them 2 signs. And that's found in chapter 4, verse 3. Basically, God says, what's that in your hand? Verse 3, throw it down on the ground. The Lord told him. So Moses threw down the staff onto the ground and turned into a snake. Now, if you had any doubt that it was a real snake, look at Moses' response. He jumps back. It was real. Okay? The staff turned into a snake. And then God tells him to actually pick it up by the tail. Step of faith here. So he reaches down, grabs it by the tail, it turns back into a staff. The second sign is this, verse 6. Then the Lord said to Moses, now put your hand inside your cloak. Basically inside your clothes, or jacket, outer garment. And then Moses did. And when he took it out again, his hand was white as snow with a severe skin disease. Now put your hand back into your cloak, the Lord said. So Moses put his hand back in. When he took it out again, it was as healthy as the rest of his body. These are 2 signs that God is not just telling Moses to show the people, but these are 2 signs also to reassure Moses, hey, I want you to see my power. Verse 5 tells us that God says, perform this sign. Then they will believe that the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, really has appeared to you. Moses, this should be enough. You don't think people will believe you? Throw your staff down. You don't think people will believe you? Show them this thing. And if that's not enough, take some water from the Nile River and pour it on the dry ground. When you do, the water from the Nile will turn to blood on the ground. Verse 9. If that's not enough, here, I have another thing for you. Go to the Nile River. Just take some water out and pour it out onto the dry ground, and it will turn into blood. People will know. Through these miraculous signs, people will know that the God of their ancestors, their fathers, appeared to you. And actually, as one we looked at last week, if that's still not enough, tell them that I am sent you. You see what God is doing? He continues to reassure Moses, not only that I will be with you, But people will know that I appear to you and that I am sending you through these miraculous signs. A third assurance is this. God says to Moses, you will return to this mountain and you will worship God here. Look at verse 12. God answered, and I will be with you. But then he continues, and he says this, and this is your sign that I am the one who has sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God at this very mountain. When it's all said and done, Moses, after you have done what I have called you to do, after you have led the people out of Egypt, you will come back onto this mountain and you will worship God. Me. You will worship God again. A return to this mountain. This is the place that you will return. And you will know that what I have said is true. That what I have called you to do, you have done. So rest assured that I am calling you to lead my people out. Know that I am calling you. I'm telling you in advance, you will come back here and you will worship me and you will see, you were right, God. You were with us every step of the way. That's an incredible assurance, reassurance. You see, when God calls us, He promises that He will be with us every step of the way. God does not call us only to leave us to do it alone. He doesn't get a kick out of seeing us sweat, struggle, trip, fail, or fall on our face. Sometimes we get a kick out of seeing other people really squirm and struggle. But God has no joy in that. Why would He call us in the first place if He was going to see and watch us struggle and fall on our face and fail time and time again? That's not the kind of God that we worship. That's not the kind of God that we serve. He calls us and always walks in step with us to accomplish His purpose. Having this assurance, we can step out in faith knowing that we are not alone, that we're not expected to figure this out on our own. We're not expected to go at it alone. God will go with us. That is a promise that gives me great comfort and reassurance. And in my life and my personal experiences, there have been things that I've done that I never thought I would do. And there have been times when I've been like, I don't know. I'm not sure if I can do this. Where I felt like God was saying, just do it. I'm with you. I will not allow you to fail. What is God calling you to do today? Are you afraid? Are you hesitant? Will you step out in obedience this morning because you know the promises of God in Scripture that says, I will be with you. God wants you to join Him in accomplishing His purpose. He won't force you, but He's asking you, will you step out in faith? And if you are doubting like Moses did, this should give you great confidence today and comfort. God says, I am with you and I will go with you. I want you to participate with me in accomplishing great things in this world.